day that we have to worship you and for all that you have done for us. I pray that as we come before you now to read your word, that you would open hearts and minds, that you would make us ready to receive that word. And I pray that you would move me aside. Please make me your herald and your mouthpiece. These things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18. That's where we're going to be this morning. Now, last week we started a series on forgiveness. And last week we talked about how it's the pathway to freedom. But this week we're going to take a look at an example of a man who did not know how to forgive, who did not know how to let go. And we're going to look at the destructive path of unforgiveness. And the reason we look at this is not because I think anybody in here is being unforgiving. It's not because I like talking about unpleasant things. It's just we need to know why we need to forgive. And this story will show us exactly that. 1 Samuel chapter 18, the grudge we're focusing on today is in chapters 28 through 28, verses 28 and 29. It says, when Samuel realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Now, last week, we noticed that forgiveness encompasses three elements. First of all, there has to be an injury or a perceived injury. We have to have negative feelings about something or someone. A debt resulting from that injury, that is something we think we have to fix, we have to make right, we have to take care of, and then the cancellation of that debt or the choice to let it go. In short, forgiveness is the process of letting go of things, taking things to God through a process that we'll begin talking about next week and letting those things go so that they don't haunt our lives. But this week, what we're honing in on is, in short, what happens when we don't forgive? What exactly takes place? What happens when the debt is not canceled? Well, since the debt's not canceled, first of all, we stay in payment mode. We constantly, anytime that person comes around or that thing comes up, we want payback. Also, the one who committed the offense is held hostage until payment is made in full. Now, I would add here this, we're going to see it does absolutely nothing really in the long run to the person that we're holding or thing that we're holding hostage. And it does a lot to us, though. Somebody, a wise woman, wise man, I don't know who it was that wrote it, but they once said that forgiveness is allowing someone or something to live in your head rent-free. That is basically they get to take up space, consume your time, and eat up your peace without ever paying you anything. And finally, when the debt is not paid in full, the debtor is forced into a path that has devastating results on everybody, as we're going to see here in just a minute. Now, I'm not going to read the full passage all at once because it's a long passage, so allow me to summarize what's going on. David's daddy called David one day. We all know this story. David's already been anointed to be the future king of Israel, but David's daddy called David, and he says, David, says, I want to know how your brothers are doing. He said, now we need an excuse to send you up there, so here are some cheeses and some loaves and some drinks and whatever else it was he gave David, I don't know. And he says, I want you to go see how your brothers are doing. So David gets there to see how his brothers are doing, right? And when he gets there, he sees something he never expected to see. I mean, he expected to walk into a war zone with arrows flying and swords flashing. And instead, what he walks into is a scene where the Israelites are cowering in their tents. Even the king, Saul, who is head and shoulders above all the other people, built like a tank, is cowering in his tent. And lo and behold, there's this giant who comes out blaspheming the name of the Lord and the armies of Israel. And David says, well, who does he think he is? And then he finds out that Saul's placed a bounty on that giant, and that if you kill him, you get a girl and you get freedom from taxes. Well, that wasn't David's only motivation. David was mad because of the blasphemy, but I don't know that wasn't, I mean, if I had the offer, it would be in my mind too, all right? Freedom from taxes especially. I mean, who doesn't want that? So David says, take me to Saul. I want to go fight this guy. So long story short, David couldn't wear Saul's armor, use Saul's sword. So they sent him out with a sling and 5 stones. And with 1 stone and a sling, David did what Saul, with all of his equipment and all of his size, could not do. And not only did they kill Goliath, but they chased down the armies of the Philistines. Usually we stop with the death of Goliath. But there's this whole scene where David takes up the sword, leads the armies of Israel against the Philistines, and they slay even more of these people. And so as he comes back into Jerusalem, the women are dancing around singing. The women who've been making, by the way, have been making over Saul for as long as he's been king. We don't know exactly how long that is right now. But they're dancing and singing. Saul has slain his thousands. David his tens of thousands. And people begin to love David more than Saul. And so Saul perceives an injury has taken place here. And I would add that for forgiveness to be needed, the injury doesn't necessarily have to be realistic. I can perceive that someone else has done me something, and I need to forgive. I need to let go of those negative feelings. And that's what happened here. David really didn't do anything other than what God called him to do, and Saul got mad at him for it. And Saul refuses to forgive. Unforgiveness is a very dangerous path. It's dangerous for the person who doesn't forgive. I mean, think about it. We, as we'll see here in a minute, there's even more to this, but we basically stew, and that thing for which we have not exercised forgiveness consumes us completely. We become like a best example I've heard is a pot with a lid, boiling water with a lid left on top of it. You know, you do that long enough and that oil or water, whatever's in there, just boils over and oozes on, and then it oozes onto everything else. And then we move on to the rest of the people who are afflicted. His family, you're going to see here in a minute, David got mad at his own son and daughter because they loved, Saul got mad at his own son and daughter because they loved David. It was dangerous for David. Saul tries to pin him to the wall with a spear 3 times. Goes on so far as to try and kill him. It's dangerous for the troops loyal to both David and Saul. Saul is going to order David to lead them into battle to try and get them killed. And there are, of course, people who have to go with him. It's dangerous for them. And it's dangerous for all of Israel, because when Saul sends the armies of Israel anywhere else other than in Israel, he's leaving Israel vulnerable and open to attack. Unforgiveness is dangerous for everybody involved. So today we're going to look at several characteristics, or steps rather, down the road to unforgiveness. First of all, there is internal destruction. We destroy ourselves internally, and this starts with jealousy. In 1 Samuel 8 and 9, it says, this made Saul very angry. What's this, he said? They credit David tens of thousands and me only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Saul allowed the accolades of everyone else to create the illusion that David was his enemy, as I've already said. The offense does not have to be real. It can just be perceived. Have you ever been in a situation before where somebody maybe didn't speak to you when they thought they should, or they didn't treat you right, or they did something and they didn't realize what you did, and you thought they were doing it at you, so you took offense? I've been there. I've been there quite a few times in my 43 years on this earth. But you know what? As I said, it does not have to be a real injury. It can be perceived, because in that moment, you and I needed to forgive, just like we'd actually been done something, didn't we? And the same thing's going on here with David and Saul. Saul perceives there's a problem. You know, he becomes so jealous of David that it's all he can think about. It's going to say that there was a bitter spirit that tormented Saul. And it's not so much a demonic spirit as Saul he allowed himself to be eaten alive with jealousy. Why are these women singing this about David and not about me? I'm the king. I should be getting the accolades. I should be getting the praise. I should be getting all of this. Why is David getting this and not me? You know, jealousy has no place in the life of a believer, because it's very dangerous. In fact, in 1 Peter 2:1, Peter writes, so get rid of all evil behavior. Be done with deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all unkind speech. Jealousy has no place in the life of the child of God. It is a very deadly thing that creates a debt that needs to be paid. How dare they get that and I didn't? That's not fair. So the steps down the road of unforgiveness, the internal destruction that takes place, it starts with jealousy. It then continues with anxiety. Saul was jealous of David, so he then perceives David to be a threat. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul. Now, that had happened some time ago. You remember, Saul refused to obey the Lord and utterly wipe out the Amalekites. And Samuel said, because you refused to do this, the Lord has refused you being king over Israel, and he anointed David. And at that moment, the Spirit of the Lord was no longer with Saul. But Saul, being blind like most of us, didn't see it at that point. So he's going to blame David. And he's going to get anxiety from the fact that the people love David. Finally, Saul sent him away and appointed him commander over 1,000 men. And David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle. 1 Samuel 18:12-16. become jealous of somebody, whenever we get this injury because somebody got something and we didn't, or we perceive that they've done us something, anxiety starts to take place. Have you ever been in that situation, kind of like Saul is here? You know, David's successful, so Saul hates him because he's jealous. Have you ever been in that position? Somebody does you something that you perceive to be wrong, and then if you let it consume enough, you can lie awake at night thinking about it. Wow, I wonder what, especially if it's a work relationship, I wonder what they're going to do to me tomorrow. I bet he gets out of bed in the morning just thinking of ways that he can torment me. Oh, I don't want to go into that place. It's so horrible. Look at what he does to me. Anxiety in relation to that. And it continues to eat at us until we hit the next step on the pathway, and that is deceit. Notice here, Saul is going to try and actually get David killed because he's so anxious about what David might do. It says, one day Saul said to David, I'm ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as your wife. But first you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles. Had he not already done that? For Saul thought, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him rather than doing it myself. Let them kill them rather than, let them kill him rather than doing it myself. My tongue stumbled. Who am I? And what is my family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law? David exclaimed. My father's family is nothing. So when the time came for Saul to give his daughter Merab in marriage to David, he gave her to Adriel, a man from Moab, instead. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Michal was fallen in love with David. Saul was delighted when he heard about it. Here's another chance to see him get killed by the Philistines. Not great. My daughter's found the man of her dreams, but I'll use my daughter, who's found the man of her dreams, to take out my enemy. Saul said to himself, but David, he said, today you have a second chance to become my son-in-law. Then Saul told his men to say to David, the king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law? When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, how can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price of a daughter of the king? When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he said, tell David that all I want for my bride is 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Vengeance on my enemies is all that I want. Well, he's really hemming it up here, really lying to everybody. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer. Before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. David fulfilled the king's requirement by presenting all their foreskins to him, twice what Saul asked for. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to be David's wife. Saul is so jealous of David. He's willing not only to put David in danger, but the men who fight under him. And I'm sure some of them probably died doing this. But he doesn't care because he's so eaten alive by jealousy, so anxious about what David might do, that it doesn't bother him to do what is morally irreprehensible and send his men on a mission that he thinks will get David killed. Saul manipulates circumstances to try and get what he wants. Isn't that what we do whenever we go down the path of unforgiveness? I mean, think about the job situation. Either we have to leave the job and find another job because we don't like so-and-so, or we try to find ways ourselves to manipulate circumstances against them where they get in trouble with somebody. Or we try to manipulate circumstances in such a way as to see them humiliated. And just like with Saul, other people wind up getting hurt. Even people like those men who were not a part of the perceived injury, who had done nothing at all. We begin imaginary discussions with ourselves. Also, I mean, have you ever lied awake at night, or maybe after you left work and you perceived somebody had done you something? Have you not had imaginary conversations with that person? Man, I wish I'd have said thus and such. I wish I'd have told them what for. I should have said this, and then we go from the wishes to actually having a conversation like we would have had it, or like we hope we can have it again. But did you know the Bible says that revenge is the Lord's? In Romans 12:17-20, he says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemy hungers, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you will heap coals of fire on their head. We are not to be out to get vengeance against anybody that we perceive has done us a wrong. We kind of covered this last week too. We're to do nice things to those people, and the only way we can do that is to forgive. So the first step on the path of unforgiveness, the pathway down to destruction, is internal destruction. Then we begin external destruction. When we actually start taking the actions that are inside of us. You see, the problem with unforgiveness, and it always goes this way, it festers and it turns into a boiling, oozing liquid that spills over from us just like out of that pot, and it gets all over everything and everyone else around us. You can't hold that in forever. At some point, you and I are going to crack, and we're going to let that out. And that's exactly what happens with Saul. The first step on external destruction is rage. Take a look at this. 1 Samuel 18, 10 and 11. Then the very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. David was playing the harp as he did each day. But Saul had a spear in his hand and suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall, but David escaped twice. See, whenever you and I start having those internal conversations with people, the problem is that eventually internal becomes external. Now, I'll grant you, Saul can get away with a little bit more than most of us because Saul is the king. But there are some people that even do what Saul does. I mean, there are such a thing as a killing of passion or a crime of opportunity whereby somebody, they didn't plot so-and-so's death. They didn't walk around dreaming about it. So-and-so just made them they say so-and-so just made them so angry that they killed them. But I happen to think maybe there was something else before that, and what made them kill them was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And if you think about it, what we call passionate killings usually, most common example would be a wife whose husband's been cheating on her. So she takes up a gun or poisons his food or whatever when he comes in one night and kills him. That's not something that just happened. That's something that's been building over time. And just like it built with Saul, it builds with us in those situations. And like Saul tried to pin David to the wall, we'll try to pin someone else to the wall. If we don't do it with a spear, we'll do it with our words. Just simply by saying unkind things that hurt that person and make them feel bad. And the interesting thing is when we start doing that, we're really the only one that looks bad. We make ourselves look like evil, vindictive, vengeful people. And that's why Ephesians 4:26 and 27 says, and don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. If you want the devil to control you, don't deal with that unforgiveness in your heart before you go to bed at night. That's when we start doing things like boiling inside and having internal conversations. If you don't want to be like Saul, pinning David to a wall, deal with your anger before you ever get into bed. Go to God and say, God, look, I need to give this to you. I need to let you know that I am angry with this person, and I am so sorry, and I want to forgive them, and I need your help to do that. That's how we avoid taking that spear or proverbial spear and pinning our opponent to the wall. Now, the next step after that, though, rage is animosity, because when Saul fails, he becomes even angrier, and there are two examples of this right here. The first one is when Saul realized the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him. Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Every time the commanders of the Philistines attacked, David was more successful against them and all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous. And of course, we recognize this is all God putting David in the position to later become king. But Saul doesn't. And Saul is even angry that Michal loves David. How petty. How petty is that? I mean, when you marry your kid off to somebody, don't you want them to be happy? Not Saul. Saul wanted her to hate David because he hated David. And when she didn't, she also became his enemy. And the more successful David became, the more he hated that. Second example, but one day when Saul was sitting at home with a spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him again. As David played the harp, David hurled his spear at David, but David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped at night. I think after a while, I might stop playing the harp for this guy. He's king, so maybe you can't, but just think about it, right? Saul is so angry with David, so consumed by the fact that people love David more than him, that he tries to kill David a third time. You know, one of the things that proves David's a man after God's own heart is David forgave it and kept coming back, I guess, because he certainly had no reason to stay there. Of course, I guess if you're his son-in-law, maybe you can't leave. I don't know. But, man, think it over. Mad, but not want you really don't want your daughter to be happy with him because you hate him so much. And then you're going to try and kill him again. Animosity is a tool of the devil. In Proverbs, it says that it irreparably damages relationships. Proverbs 29:22. An angry person starts fights. A hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sin. You know, here in a minute, we're going to see that it doesn't just start fights with the person we're mad at either. Because, like I said, eventually that's got to spill out on everyone around us. We become so angry that every contradiction, everything that somebody does that we don't like becomes a perceived grievance. Because we're angry with someone else. We're instructed also not to befriend angry people, to even be careful of people who walk around angry all the time. Don't befriend angry people or associate with hot-tempered people, or you will learn to be like them and endanger your soul. Proverbs 22:24. Nothing is more contagious than an inability to forgive. It's interesting. I mean, in any other thing, people can be around it. Drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever it is. Somebody, come on, man, come participate with us. And even if they're your friend, it's still kind of easy to say no most of the time. But an angry spirit, boy, somebody starts chiming in, going off about someone else. This is how gossip is born, by the way. Chiming off, going off about someone else. I want to feel sorry for them because they're my friend, and I see it as a good thing. And I start chiming in with them. And I come to hate that person through the gossip just as much as they do. That's what he's talking about here when he says, you'll learn to be like them and you'll be led into the snare of the devil. Their unjust anger, their unresolved wrath becomes a part of your life then. Animosity is a very dangerous thing, a very contagious thing. And then finally, we make our way to overflowing bitterness. Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. Now here's David. Saul has said he wants to kill David. Jonathan's arguing that he shouldn't kill David because David's a loyal servant to the crown. And Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. You stupid son of a whore, he swore at him. Do you think I don't know that you want him to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as this son of Jesse is alive, you will never be king. Now go and get him and kill him so I can kill him. In other words, don't kill him yourself. Bring him here. I still want to do it. He still wants to collect that debt himself. But why should he be put to death? Jonathan asked his father. What has he done? Then Saul hurled a spear at Jonathan, intending to kill him. So Jonathan realized that his father was really determined to kill David. Yep, I guess that would have drove it home. Saul's animosity toward David produced such a vengeful, destructive path that anybody or anything who stood in his way was going to get mowed down. It's kind of like, somebody once said to me with regard to a moose, said, moose are aggressive. I said, well, possibly. So what do you mean? I said, well, that moose is about 4 times my size, 5 if he's a really big moose. I said, it's not so much that he hates me, but if I'm in between point A and point B and he wants to go in from one end to the other, do you think he cares that I'm standing there? No, he's going to run me right down. And that is what unchecked anger, unforgiven debts do to anybody and everybody. Anyone who stands in their path, they want their vengeance. They don't get mad, much to their own deception. They say they get even. And anybody who stands in their way of getting even is going down, just like they did with Saul. Continuing to carry the torch of animosity results in bitterness taking root and growing. Hebrews 12:15 says, look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting you. Bitterness is called a root because it kind of does a similar thing. When trees grow, those roots go down deep. And you can cut down a tree, but if you don't take up the stump and the roots, guess what? It takes years, but that tree eventually grows back. And bitterness is like that. If we don't get down to the root of the problem and dig that out and forgive and take care of that, we can even think that we've forgiven somebody and that root of anger is still there. And the next time they do something or somebody else mentions their name, there we are to start saying our piece and run over the person who speaks in their favor or their defense. Bitterness is a very dangerous thing. Ruin is the last step. And God, I hope nobody in here ever gets to this one. What's more, the Lord will hand you and the army of Israel over to the Philistines tomorrow. He's talking here to Saul, and you and your sons will be here. The Lord will bring down the entire army of Israel to defeat. Now to preface this with what happened, Samuel is talking to Saul. Now, the interesting thing here is Samuel's dead. Samuel has gone on to be with the Lord. In fact, he says when he comes back, Saul, why are you troubling me? He's gone on to be with Christ. Well, what happened? Well, Saul is so bitter and so angry and so in disobedience towards God that he can't hear from God anymore. God can't communicate with him. So Saul seeks out a witch to conjure the dead. Now, this witch was apparently a fake because when Samuel came back, she screams out in fear and nearly falls over in a dead faint. Saul is so consumed by his rage that he can't hear from God. And this drives him to a witch, which ultimately seals the end of Saul. And just like bitterness sealed the end of Saul, it will seal the end of us. How many people have been so bitter with somebody that they've taken up a gun or a knife or poison and they've killed the object of their animosity? And now they get to spend the rest of their life in prison for one moment of retribution. Is it worth it? No. How about the people who tried to take on somebody at their job only to get fired for what they're trying to do? Was it worth it? No. How about somebody who's ruined a lifelong friendship because they refuse to let go of something and ruin that? Is it worth it? No. But that's where unforgiveness leads. That's where harboring anger and animosity, that's where they lead. Is down the path of ultimate destruction. You know, harboring unforgiveness destroys us internally and externally. The only way to stop this process and this destruction is to make a conscious decision to forgive. Will you make that choice today? Will you take that anger and that bitterness in your heart to God and say, Lord, I need your help with this. Lord, I want to forgive this person. I need you to take this burden off of my shoulders. Only you can shoulder this. And you know, I would say that doing that is kind of like taking my trash out. I love it when I take my trash out the door. You know why? Because there's a guy that comes and he picks that up and I have no idea where it goes, so I can't go pick it up again. And if you will give it to God, he will take that and cast it as far as the east is from the west and enable you to be friends or at least acquaintances with that individual again, possibly. But most importantly, he'll enable you to be free and not travel the path of destruction. We're going to have a time of invitation. If there's a decision that you need to make,